It's going down. Great. Welcome, everybody. You're in Senate Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs, and we are today continuing our work on workforce development and the military recruitment workforce opportunity that we are looking forward to expanding. So we're going to begin with, I think, Brian Carpenter and June Heston, and I would just like to welcome you both, and we're going to just go around the table and introduce ourselves. Because June, we've seen June in several other committees. Good to see you. But Brian, you're brand new to us. So Thomas, why don't you kick it off?
Hi, Brian. I think we met before. I'm Tom Chittenden. I represent the southeast quadrants of Chittenden County.
Hi, Senator Keisha Ron-Hinsdale. It's great to see both of you, two of my favorite people.
Allison Clarkson, Windsor County District.
Randy Brock, Franklin County and Northern Grand Isle County.
Good morning, Dave Weeks, representing Rutland County.
So it is just great to have you both. And the subject that we're looking at is how we can encourage an incredibly skilled and engaged workforce who are retiring from the military to come to Vermont and anchor here. So, Brian, I think we're going to start with you. And if you'd be kind enough to introduce yourself and share with us I think it's some passion about this issue.
I do, and thank you for inviting me to testify in front of the committee. I'm Brian Carpenter, and I have a number of different qualifications, I think, to speak to this I'd like to share. So I am former military. I'm a retired brigadier general. I served on active duty for almost a decade until I moved back to Vermont to take over a family business. I stayed active in the Vermont Army Guard and retired as a brigadier general and a former assistant adjutant general from 2010 to 2014. I was a prior member of the State Workforce Development Board and as the owner of and general manager of Champlain Valley Equipment. We have 5 stores here in Vermont. We employ 110 people here in Vermont, plus or minus. We also have 6 stores in New York, which is an experience because New York does have a difference in the retirement pay treatment. One of the strategies that we discussed when I was on the State Workforce Development Board was to we were really challenged to fill manufacturing and trade positions here in Vermont, and we had at that time proposed this with a support for the exemption of military retirement pension to help fill those positions. And some of the data we were looking at, the average age of military retirees is around 47 years old. They can be anywhere from 38 to 60 plus, but coming off from active duty as a retiree, the average age is 47. We have a very large post in Fort Drum, New York, Fort Drum over in Watertown, New York, with a high troop concentration. Back before the current time, there was roughly 15,000 military service members. But in December 2023, Fort Drum announced it would be the home to a new Army task force, bringing another additional 1,500 new soldiers and civilian personnel. Besides the 15,000 military, there's roughly 3,700 civilian personnel there, government service workers that support the base. So it's a real vibrant community. I happen to have a store in Watertown now and have some experience with what that means for the community. And it's as far as proximity for retirees who settled in Vermont, the services for a base Fort Drum is not that far, and has all of the services that a retiree would potentially look for. Retirement affordability, it certainly is a consideration here in Vermont. To retain middle-class retirees, like the military retirees will typically look at a second career. They're young. Military retirees have a known propensity for entrepreneurship. Many start small businesses, but a lot of them go into the trades and work part-time or full-time careers following their military retirement. Along with the retiree also comes families. Many, because of their age, many of them are coming with they move with their children. Their children haven't completed the school years yet, and most often spouses, and many of those spouses also have a variety of skills that they've gained through the job shifts that come with military moves. Active duty military move quite frequently, and so the spouse is forced in many cases to take the jobs that are available in those communities and learn other skills as well. There's a program that many of them are running, different troops to trades programs. These are initiatives that help the military personnel transition into careers where the skilled trades like plumbing, heating, air conditioning, electrical work. And these programs provide training, career placement assistance, and often connect veterans with companies seeking skilled labor. And so many of these posts have programs helping with the retirement transition. What we need to have is an equal footing for our businesses to be able to offer the retirement exemption so that we're not at a disadvantage when looking at other states. We have a lot to offer in Vermont. What we don't have is a pretty significant carrot of the retirement exemption, where most other states have looked at that. I'm not saying that this is an end-all be-all, but we're not a serious player right now in trying to attract one of the largest mobile workforces within the U.S. I think our goal should be to leverage the transferable skills and experience gained in the military and offer stable, well-paying jobs here in Vermont. A second thing is it's from my former job as the Assistant Adjutant General. It's a recruiting tool for our Vermont Guard positions, and it would hopefully encourage more of the Vermont Guard retirees to stay in Vermont as well. Many of my friends, once they retired from their main job, left the state because they could have the pension exemption. And the pensions are significant for many of these people. It's a big part of their retirement income.
Yes, General Knight, who was with us on Tuesday, went through, actually had some illustrations of some of the people who are retiring for a National Guard and are moving elsewhere, which is heartbreaking.
Yes, well, and I guess I didn't watch his testimony, but I would speak to it as well. Many of them, it's disappointing to see them leaving the state, but I understand because they can get more bang for their buck in other states right now.
Right.
And lastly, I have personal experience with hiring prior military, and I find that the prior military, there's more leadership training in the military than many get in other jobs. And when you're looking for supervisors and leaders of stores, for instance, several of my store leaders are prior military. It brings they have some formal leadership training. They also have much experience with complex tasks, organizing, logistics, putting plans together, and they get formal training in that. And so it's an opportunity for a workforce that we really need to be serious about trying to attract to the state. And without the carrot of the retirement exemption, I just don't see us being an attractive place for retirees to move.
Thank you, Brian. Any questions for Brian before we shift to June? Great. June, why don't you pick it up?
Myself off mute. Okay. Hello, my name is June Heston. And thank you very much, Madam Chair and committee members, for the invitation to be here to speak to you today. I'm the surviving spouse of Brigadier General Michael Heston, and I believe many of you knew him from his time that he served as the Deputy Adjutant General for the Vermont National Guard. For his entire career, Mike advocated for members of the National Guard and their families, and I'm here today to continue to carry that torch, not only for the members of the military and veterans and their families, but I'm here because I'm a native Vermonter and I love this state. Throughout our history, Vermont has been a leader in treating all people with respect and the honor they deserve. And unfortunately, when it comes to our veterans and military members, I believe we're falling short, which is why I'm here to speak to all of you about the effects of the shortcoming on the ability to recruit and keep our military retirees and veterans and their spouses in Vermont. They're leaving here because there's a financial benefit to do so. And you heard from Mike that there are many examples of these individuals. And I just want to highlight one example because Kim Seiner and her husband, Mark, who both retired from the National Guard, I had a conversation with her. They moved to New Hampshire and their grandchildren are here in Vermont. And for any of you who are grandparents, you know the significance of that decision. You have already heard exempting military pensions and survivor benefits from taxation in Vermont can be a smart strategy to support workforce development and bolster the state's economy and address demographic challenges. I want to talk, and you've heard many of these points already about attracting and retaining skilled volunteers and what they would bring. I want to talk to you about one of the things that was mentioned by Bob Burke on Tuesday was that the average retirement pay is approximately $27,000. That's an average. Some is less, some is more. In 2003, the median income in Vermont was about $41,000 per individual and $78,000, which I've since learned is more closer to $85,000 now. So assuming that the income tax rate approximately 6%, because it falls somewhere between 3.25 and 8.75, the tax gain on that $27,000 is approximately $1,600. And if this retiree relocates their family, including a spouse, you've now lost taxes of over $4,600. That doesn't count if they have children who are at workforce age, which many of them do. So you're losing at least 65% of the taxable income of this family when they leave the state. So when looking to boost workforce participation and with this shrinking, aging workforce in the state, that's important. Survivors are a huge part of this equation. My husband, Mike, who many of you knew, passed away in 2018 from pancreatic cancer that was deemed service-connected. And for more than a decade before Mike got sick, we discussed moving Vermont upon retirement because of the tax implication. And as a person who was born and raised here, that was not exactly what I wanted to do, but it seemed like a good financial decision. Since Mike's passing, that move may become necessary for me. I'm fortunate that Mike chose to.
Oops. we lost her, and I was just gonna tell her that her internet was pretty unstable.
When she comes back on, recommend she kill her. But
I agree. I was just about to do that. In fact, I was gonna do that before Phil put me on. Brian, thank you. We're just gonna wait for a second to see if June can come back in.
Do you not see?
Thank you, June. We can hear you. And can you hear us?
Yes.
Great. Your internet is clearly unstable. Perhaps if you could continue just without your video on, that would be great. And I think then we'll be able to get through the rest of the testimony.
Yeah, I'm in Florida on vacation. I have no idea what.
Yeah. So your internet is unstable. So I would kill the video if you can and just continue on the audio.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh. Oh. All right. I'm not sure where it dropped off, so I'll start back with Mike.
Talked off about talking about the survivors as a big piece of the equation and just a little after that.
Okay, so my husband, Mike, passed away in 2018 from pancreatic cancer that was deemed service-connected from his exposure to toxins from burn pits. For more than a decade before Mike got sick, we discussed moving to Vermont, moving out of Vermont upon retirement because of the tax implication. And as a person who was born and raised here, that wasn't exactly as it seemed like. It did seem like a good financial decision. Since Mike's passing, that move might become a necessity.
Lost you again, June.
I think, June, we're losing you. If you could.
I tried to stop her video, but it didn't seem to be.
So,
She looks like she's.
June, are you still there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, why don't you just keep your video off and because we can hear you and it's not as distorted. So why
Yeah,
don't
my
you,
video is off.
okay, great. And we can hear you. So if you just continue and we have your testimony also printed out.
Great. So I just wanted to say that I'm fortunate that Mike chose to opt into the survivor benefit plan, which means he contributed a portion of his paycheck to ensure I would receive this benefit. And obviously he didn't know how important this benefit would become. As you heard in earlier testimony this week, it provides 55% of the pension he earned to me. And the reason this is important to me and many others, for me, I left my job as the associate vice president at Norwich University after 2 years of trying to meet my personal obligations with my family and Mike going through treatment and my professional obligations. So for many survivors, a 2-income family becomes a household of 55% of one pension. And obviously survivors, most survivors are going to have to work. I'm a nonprofit professional, and you heard on Tuesday that 1 out of every 5 Vermonters is working in nonprofit. My skills are transferable anywhere. Our adult children live in Rhode Island, one of the 18 states that do not tax survivor benefits. And I know that was a question that you had on Tuesday. There are another 10 states that give partial exemption on SBP, and there are 8 states that have no income tax. All of New England and New York exempt survivor benefits from income tax. And the reason this is important is now we know that toxic exposure of our veterans will result in more illnesses and more death. And these survivors will need to make decisions that are best for their financial future. In addition, as mentioned in testimony on Tuesday, spouses are making the decision oftentimes for where they're going to locate after following a military member around from post to post during their career. You've already heard that the annual spending for military members is $8.26 million. In addition, they bring federal health care, they start second careers, they establish new businesses and contribute to their communities. One of the things that wasn't mentioned in earlier testimony that I'm aware of is that survivors of a service-connected loss with school-age children are eligible for dependent educational assistance, which provides educational benefit for dependents up to age 26 and for spouses for 10 years after the loss. This benefit could be an economic boost, both for the educational institutions and for our workforce with surviving spouses looking to build their skills in another career and add value to our workforce. I've heard the concerns that by exempting these benefits, the expectation would be to do the same for all the public servants to do that do good. And I want to express my thoughts on this because Mike was a Vermont State Trooper for his entire career. And he also joined the National Guard early on in his career. As a trooper, he was home most days. He missed few birthdays or anniversaries, even though for the first probably 10 years, he worked nights. He was able to get the kids to soccer or football practice. As a soldier, there were many days and months without seeing his family. He deployed for 7 months, 15 months, and 12 months to Afghanistan. He missed many birthdays and holidays. He did not see his son learn how to ride a bike or his daughter's freshman year of high school. Military service is a different kind of sacrifice for service members and family. Less than 1% of the population volunteers to serve this country, and we owe it to them to honor this commitment. The amount that we're talking about, when you look at the cost of this tax-wise, is currently estimated at $3.9 million. And that is a lot of money, but it's approximately 0.04%, which is 0.04% of the state's $9.06 billion budget. And according to the recent state data, the fiscal cost of such an exemption, especially compared to the economic benefit and social benefits of retaining military members, is small. It's an investment in people who've already given so much. And beyond the economics and policy, it's a matter of values. Vermont has a proud tradition of service, and I think we need to honor them by ensuring that we do not burden those who serve or the families left behind. That $1,600 a year that they're paying in taxes seems like it's not a lot of money. And for some, it may not be, but for others, it may be a car payment every month. And I think that it's psychologically when people are leaving the military and they hear, well, Vermont taxes, it doesn't matter how much it is, it doesn't matter how much they're going to be paying. In their head, they're like, we're not going to go there because they tax our pension. One thing Mike would often say to others, I heard him say often, is do the right thing. Sometimes in more colorful language than that. I ask you now to do the right thing. And I want to thank you all for the service, your service to our state and your consideration of this important issue.
Thank you so much, June. And I just want to thank you for your advocacy. You really always step up to the plate to be an articulate advocate on behalf of whatever you're advocating for. And we appreciate that, both on the burn pit issue. I really so appreciated your work on that and your continued work on that and on this issue. This is great. Anybody have any questions? Thomas.
Just a quick comment, June. Always great to hear from you. And I really appreciate how you laid out your testimony and included the moral argument, which I always gravitate towards. I too do think that this is a moral issue and that we shouldn't be collecting these dollars. And I just want to highlight that great quote from George Washington, that the willingness with which our young people are likely to serve, putting their lives on the line for this nation in any war, no matter how justified, shall be directly proportional to how they perceive veterans of earlier wars were treated and appreciated by our nation. So this is important for us to do so that people, when they sign up, know that this country, this state, care about their service and that that's materialized in our tax policy. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any questions for both either Brian or June?
Well, I too want to share my appreciation for both. And I have been trying to say, less articulately and personally, how different it is to have someone who's serving abroad than someone who can come home every night and be there for the birth of a child or other milestones in life. And, you know, I think that it's really important that that's on the record. That is not to compare this service to other forms of service, but I think those can be taken up at a later time when those groups, you know, ask for some other kind of level of support. You know, I just worry that others in the building have conflated this and are using it to otherwise slow down this very meaningful benefit for people who have served in this country and served out of state.
I would like to thank both you and Brian for coming here today. I think your testimony was powerful and illustrates very, very well how important this bill is. And you certainly have our commitment to do what we can to see that it moves forward. This is a bill that I've sponsored on at least 5 separate occasions in the past. And this time I hope we'll get it across the plate. But again, thank you very, very much for your very powerful testimony today.
Thank you. Thank you both. So I hope you'll stick around and listen to both Megan Sullivan from the chamber and then Patrick Titterton, who's going to talk about the money piece. Although, as we know, the tax discussion, I mean, we need to understand the economic impact of the recruitment piece, but the tax discussion will go forward in finance, which is where this bill will go next. So, Megan, come join us.
And while Megan's doing that, Mr. Carpenter, I am reporting a permit bill in natural resources tomorrow that includes a wetland component. So if you'd like to write to that committee in the meantime or follow that, I just wanted you to know that. This is
Thank you. Yes, another critical piece to state
Right.
economic development.
Yes, and at some point, Brian, we may have you back to talk about housing, because we also are appreciative of those skills and interests of yours as well. So, Megan, we welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members, for having me back again today. Always good to see you. Megan Sullivan, Vice President of Government Affairs for the Vermont Chamber of Commerce. Appreciate the opportunity to come in today and speak on this, what we would say critically important amendment to this year's workforce development bill. I would love to spend my testimony talking about the moral arguments for this. It's something that the chamber believes in. Certainly, we are going to be honoring Major General Gregory Knight as our Citizen of the Year next month. We'd love to have you all there. I'll make sure to send you details. But I am going to focus today on the fiscal and economic rationale behind both parts of this amendment for exempting military retirees and survivor benefits, as well as promoting this as a recruitment tool. So there are some that will have framed this as an expense, right? It's going to cost about $4 million to state revenue because of we bring in $100 million in federally funded military pensions and survivor benefits. That's about what the income tax will be. I provided you all, and it looks like Heidi has printed it out, but it should also be posted, a detailed study that South Carolina did modeling the economic and fiscal impact of exempting military pension using a dynamic scoring system. They use a modeling system called REMI for this analysis. I'm sure folks who have been in this committee are familiar with REMI from the use of that program by the state for VEGI, the Vermont Economic Growth Incentive. And that is relied on with some additional modeling by the state to see what the economic impact is of businesses growing in the state. So a familiar model that was used in South Carolina. And what they were looking at was if the state exempts military pensions, what is going to be needed? What's the return on investment? What do we need for recruitment to sort of come out to either a positive or net zero? And what they found is they studied it at a 0%, 2.5%, 1%, 2.5%, and 5% increase. And what would that do to the state? And in both the 2.5 and 5% produced a net positive to state revenues by the second year of the exemption due to increased spending and economic activity, even after accounting for the foregone tax revenue. And I think it highlights that attracting sufficient retirees is a determining factor in achieving the net fiscal gain. I think, though, focusing solely on potential losses from future action is really overlooking the current opportunity cost that we're facing. There are many other states, including all of our neighbors, that don't tax retirement income at all. And as a result, we're seeing Vermont is falling behind in competing for this critical population. Vermont's veteran population, and we do understand the difference between a veteran and a military retiree using the data that we have, though it's can be challenging in some data sets to differentiate. The Vermont's veteran population is projected to decline at 2.7% annually, which is nearly double the national rate of 1.6%.
And just to remind the committee, we got a terrific additional piece of information from Bob Berg on this, which is our population veterans, percent of the population veterans are military retirees and percent of the population of retirees.
Yeah. And so the trend of that 2.7 is most pronounced among individuals aged 40 to 64. The very demographic Vermont needs to be focused on attracting and retaining to the state. Losing military retirees or failing to attract them has real economic consequences already. Each retiree that chooses Vermont brings $25,000 in federally funded income into our economy annually. So this is money that is not being generated in Vermont. It is being imported into Vermont to be spent in Vermont. Loss for retirees represent not just foregone tax revenue, but also missed opportunities in labor force contributions, particularly in high demand sectors like healthcare, skilled trades, IT, law enforcement, have household economic impact. Retirees often relocate with spouses, school-age children, and strengthen both the workforce and school enrollment. Housing investment, retirees tend to be long-term homeowners who bolster the property tax base and commonly use VA-backed loans, which makes homeownership in places like Vermont with high housing costs easier. And civic engagement. Military retirees both volunteer and participate in community life at higher rates than non-veterans. So this out-migration we're not actively addressing now should be seen already as both foregone revenue and foregone economic development opportunity. We're not just missing out on the potential tax revenue, but the entire spectrum of economic contributions that support vibrant communities and a healthy economy. Roughly 70% of military retirees are between 35 and 50 years old. Experienced, disciplined, mission-driven individuals with technical and leadership skills that align directly with Vermont's workforce shortages. Sorry, I don't want to go over too much of whatever you said. Yes. So passing this exemption is necessary, but we would say alone is not necessarily a sufficient recruitment strategy. I think there are many issues that we've heard in this building, whether it is investment in training for some of these high need areas like childcare or healthcare, or even ensuring that childcare workers receive a higher salary. That I'm told this will help bring more people to the state if we do this. But it won't if we don't actually tell anybody about it. We need to do a better job of elevating the work that you are all doing so that when we make these type of critical improvements, we're not just letting it sit inactive on a website, hoping that people see it. Hope isn't an active strategy. And this committee has a great history of creating programs that can go viral. And we saw how much marketing, even if it was by others, a program can really highlight Vermont.
Yeah.
So passing the exemption is critical for us to be able to be competitive, but the work that we do to actively target this passage, as well as the quality of life in Vermont and the opportunities and community that Vermont offers to military retirees where they are and the incredible job opportunities that we have is really a critical piece that goes hand in hand with that exemption. So we strongly support this amendment in both aspects of it and look forward to working through the legislative process to hopefully see this come to fruition this year.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm just going to just keep us moving and include Patrick. Have Patrick come and join us because we are trying to launch through this morning. So can you join us? Megan, thank you. That complimented our earlier testimonies.
Good morning.
Good morning, Patrick.
Well, I always like to make it all about myself, but I just want to say happy birthday, Madam Chair.
Right, thank you.
Um,
Thank you. Almost. Been to a party today. Actual party, birthday on Saturday.
so I believe Heidi printed it up for all of you. I see it in front of a few of you, but I'll share my screen for anyone
Yes, I
following
think those
along
people who are up-
remotely.
yeah.
And several of your witnesses have made a few aspects of this a little easier for me and giving you a lot of sort of the demographic information that I was planning on sharing. So
Great.
So yeah, what you have in front of you is a memo. It was originally for a bill. H-43 is the exact same policy which you're contemplating here. There's not a fiscal note. It's a memo because this policy hasn't passed out of any committee yet. So just in terms of like logistics, that's why. Real quickly, and I don't think I said who I am. I'm Patrick. I'm with the Joint Fiscal Office.
Are you a partisan group?
We are super partisan, exactly.
Julie
Yeah.
Victor always gives that.
I know. She has that stock slide that she always gives. So yeah, the Joint Fiscal Office is nonpartisan. I'm just trying to give you
That is
facts,
given. We all know it. One of our
facts as they exist. I'm not gonna opine, but yeah. So you've heard this. We estimate, along with the tax department, this is a consensus estimate, that this policy would result in $3.9 million in foregone revenue in personal income taxes. And that's on an annual basis.
and would grow, one assumes, with the more retirees that would come and retire here. Maybe not.
Maybe,
Given the intake and outtake.
I've looked at other states, and I've also looked at Vermont. So over the last 10 years, so from 2015 to 2025, there was about a 2.3, so that's 10 years worth of, data we're looking at. 2.3% growth in that population in retirees in Vermont. Sort of background, general Vermont growth was 3.6, I've written down here. So it's slightly below, but when you're talking about percentages in that range, it's relatively close.
Mhm.
But it is tracking a little bit lower than sort of general Vermont population growth. So, it has been growing every single year. Whenever we look at the data, there's, 7, 15, 8 more retirees that the Department of Defense is reporting are living and receiving their benefits in Vermont. So that's to say it's a relatively stable population. I wouldn't expect sort of runaway growth from that 3.9. Because there's a lot of factors when someone makes a decision into where they're going to move upon retirement, right? It's not just the tax environment, it can be climate, amenities,
Children.
cost of housing, availability of housing, which I know that you all spend a lot of time thinking about. So it's not sort of a single faceted decision. So anyway, coming back to this document, just to sort of remind everyone, there is an existing exemption for this income in statute. Basically, the income thresholds are set the same to which you can receive an exemption on your Social Security income. However, there is a $10,000 cap. So if you hit the income thresholds, you can exempt up to $10,000 of your military pension benefit income. And the other key piece of that is you have to pick one or the other. So you can't take both the exemption for Social Security and military income. You have to pick one or the other. Every year when you file your taxes, you can go through that sort of calculation to figure out which gets you the better deal. And you can sort of flip flop back and forth if you want. It's not like you have to elect one and then you're stuck with that every year going forward. And so I know that it was brought up the other day that the tax department was unable to give you the sort of cost estimate of the existing policy. And I'm here to confirm that.
That we can't get.
We can't, and I'll give you the reason for it. So basically the way the forms work out is there is a worksheet that taxpayers have that they can go through and calculate what their retirement income exemption should be. So that's a worksheet that they sort of do on their own, and then they take that bottom line figure and input it into our form 112. So by the time it gets to form 112, it's sort of a commingled, we don't know which election you're taking, sort of math problem. So basically the military retirement, cost of that military retirement exemption is sort of built within the same bucket of money that the Social Security exemption goes into. And if you look at the tax expenditure report, you'll see it reflected in the same way. We sort of have that, the CSRS, military retirement and Social Security sort of commingled.
Brandon.
If you did pass this bill passed, presumably the tax department, in terms of determining whether it's working or not as we intended, would have the number from the amount of military retirement that is earned in Vermont based on what they get currently, the methodology they use for that now. And so you would be able to hone in on whether or not, in fact, this is working and we're getting more military retirement income coming into the state. Is that a fair statement?
I think so, if I'm understanding correctly. Basically what they would end up doing with this, since it's essentially a new tax exemption type. So they would probably create a new form or a new box on the form that sort of delineates it from the other types.
It's an expanded tax exemption.
Yeah.
That exists. It would just be expanded.
Yeah, basically, my understanding is that right
They wouldn't
now,
use the same worksheet.
yes,
Sorry.
the Department of Taxes receives information from the Department of Defense as to what military retirement income is paid to people in Vermont. So they're getting it automatically right now. And it's not a case of someone having to input it as a taxpayer. It may or may not be accurate. They're getting what is paid in Vermont as military retirement as part of an input from the Department of Defense.
Yeah, so one thing to remember is sort of the very starting point of the Vermont tax code starts with adjusted gross income, AGI. That is something that's compiled through the IRS federal form, the 1040. So at that point, really all that taxpayers are doing is just pulling the figures from that federal form, and that's the starting point on their Vermont taxes. So I don't know if it would be accurate to say that they have sort of a direct line of communication with the Department of Defense and know exactly sort of the income associated with certain Social Security numbers or tax verification
We will
numbers.
have, I'm sure, more discussion as this
Yeah.
progresses to finance.
Sure,
Would you be kind enough to finish, because our witnesses for the next
absolutely.
work is right.
And this was touched on, just really important distinction. Veterans are different than military retirees. To be a retiree, you have to have 20 years of service. To be a veteran, you basically, general rule of thumb is you have to just have completed basic training.
I actually thought we heard from Bob Burke that retirees are now, that's changed, and they're now able to retire with fewer years, but less military pensions.
So that's the blended retirement system
Yes.
that he's been talking, that they have implemented. I think the start date was 2017 or something like that. But for the pension benefits, which is what we're talking about
Right.
here, that those requirements still sort of stand. They do have a blended system where they can, if they do 10 years or whatever, and they're contributing into the 401k type plan, they have that to rely on in retirement. But what we're talking about is sort of the pension benefits here. And just to give you a sense of scale of why the distinction between veterans and retirees is important, There's about 34,000 veterans in the state and about 3,900 retirees. About 3,600 of them
Yeah.
are receiving benefits.
Bob sent us this yesterday.
Yep, and that's all from the Department of Defense actuarial report. And so another thing that I have included in here, and you heard some of these numbers. So retirees receive about $90 million in pension benefit income on an annual basis in Vermont. The way that shakes out, it's about $25,000 on average per retiree. And just because this caused a little confusion in other committees, why are there 3,900 retirees but only 3,600 of them receiving benefits? So if you're an active duty retiree, you can claim your pension immediately upon retirement. If you're a reserve and you retire, you have to wait until you're age 60 to start claiming it. So that's a little bit of the distinction. Looking at the United States, compared to Vermont as a whole, specifically, on average in the US, about $31,000 on an annual basis is the average benefit. So Vermont, on average, the benefit amounts are a little bit lower. It's about 25%, or sorry, 25,000. I think that's like an 18-ish% lower figure there. But even within retirees, there's a big distinction between, on average, if you're retired as an officer or someone who's enlisted. Officers, they make up about 25% of retirees, but they, their average pension benefits are significantly higher, over twice as much on average than enlisted folks. So, so if we look at some of the percentages that I was talking about, if we compare, they get about $40 million overall, and they make up about 25% of the population. So about 25% of the population is receiving about 40 to 45% of the benefits. So they're the higher income folks within this population we're talking about. And then, like I said, enlistees a little bit lower, on average about $18,000 in benefits. I'm trying to go fast.
Yeah, this is good. And I think we'll have you back because I think there are a couple of questions that we
absolutely.
Yeah.
And important to also include here, and you just took some testimony about this, this is not just about the retirees, it also includes the survivors. Like was mentioned, enlisted folks have the option to sort of pay into I guess it's kind of like a annuity or life insurance policy, so that on their death their spouse or in some cases eligible dependents could still receive some of those benefits. I think they max out, and you can sort of pick the level of the plan that you want, but I think it maxes out around 55%.
Yeah, that's what June.
And so just to look at the population, there's about 750 of survivors receiving these benefits in Vermont. They receive about $9 million, and on average, that shakes out to about $12,000 in these benefits for those survivors. I know there's been a little bit of talk about sort of the return on investment question. I'll just say right off the bat that our office does not do dynamic modeling. The reason being, there's a couple of reasons. One, it's sort of unverifiable. There's no way to prove, or there's no good way to prove that it's true. And second, a lot of the figures that get talked about, if I were to say, okay, what would we have to do to sort of break even on just personal income tax, which is an important part of the general fund? Looking at, you heard the median household income figure, which would account for sort of different household composition types. Sort of the math that I looked at was be like 1,200 new military retiree households to offset the personal income tax portion of it. Of course, they're not just paying personal income taxes; they pay sales tax, property taxes, gas tax. If we were to sort of include all of that, and this is sort of relying on some estimates that ACCD did a couple of years ago.
Right.
If we were to look at that, it kind of shakes out to about 500 new military retirees to sort of offset the cost. And again, that's not dynamic modeling. I'm not suggesting that's what has to be it, but I think it maybe gives you a window in terms of like sense of scale of how many new retirees would need to be attracted to sort of
Right.
offset some of that. I know, Megan mentioned some, South Carolina University, I think.
Yeah.
The names of the university.
Megan just gave us.
Clemson. Oh, it's right there. in front
Clemson.
of, Senator Weeks.
Right.
So we haven't done that type of analysis. And if you wanted something, I think what they used was Remy, she mentioned. You'd need to probably ask Tom Quebec to look at that for you. And
He has access to the record.
he has access,
Yeah.
but just as a rule of thumb, that's not something that our office does, because
And finance can, I think, do that. I think one of the things we had talked about, and we'll have you back, because I don't want to keep everybody waiting here.
Yep.
But I think there's some other questions that we have for you. So if it's okay with the committee, we will have you back. Thank you
That's
for
totally
this
fine.
additional
Yep.
piece. It certainly complements the testimony we had from Brian, from June and Megan. So thank you very much for this. And if people want to get Patrick some of their questions that
I know something.
and that we will then, I have a couple that I'm going to ask you, and we'll have you back next week, because I'm hoping we will wrap this up and get this off to finance soon.
Okay.
So thank you very much, Patrick. This is great. And thank you, Brian and June, if you're still with us. And we are going to pivot to two other bills that are in our
Out of
committee.
Sophie's way.
Thank you again.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, this was pretty interesting. Great. Thank you, thank you. Okay. We are going to begin, I believe, we're going to have Tanya introduce. We have a tradition of having our colleagues come and share their bill proposals with us. We are, oh, thank you, my dear. And so we're going to look at two bills that Tanya has proposed that we may, given their scale, may require a more biennial view, but we are going to take them up and listen, and some of them, particularly the credit score piece, may fit into the work we're doing in our housing. So Tanya, welcome. Why don't you, I know you need to get back to committee. If you wanted to, just for time for you, if you wanted to introduce sort of both, and then Sophie will separate them out and walk through them.
Perfect.
Great, thank you, welcome.
Thank you for having me. For the record, Senator Tanya Chelsky. I believe I am here to talk about S90 and S128.
Yep.
So let's start with S90. So S90 is a bill about employee privacy protections. And what it does is expand the prohibition on credit checking and drug checking. Currently, you can't do that until you've made it past like the first round of filling out an application. And this extends that prohibition to having an actual job
This was
offer.
the check the box piece.
Yeah, so many years ago, we
Yes, that's right,
we
we
banned
did.
the box on job applications. And so you are unable to ask about a criminal record history on a job application, but you could ask about it in the very first interview. And this pushes that out further to having an actual job offer on the table and limiting it to if it is relevant to the job. And it is both for criminal background checks and credit checks and substance use testing. And my thought process behind this is that what we do in our own time is not really our employer's business unless it's our employer's business. And so I could certainly understand if someone was applying for a job and had been offered a job as a pharmacist, that we might want to know, what if they're actively using substances or what their, background history, criminal background history, because I don't know that we need their credit history. But if someone's applying to be a banker, maybe we would want their credit history. So it really tries to narrow in those types of checks to things that are relevant to the job once you actually have a job offer. So trying to protect people's privacy is really the goal of the bill.
Great.
Yes.
Any questions for Tanya on that? You look like you might have a question.
Well, I hear that one of our big problems helping people get commercial driver's licenses is marijuana testing right now. And that's just to get the license. And it's causing like a trucking shortage and a bus driver shortage. And I mean, like, granted, you know,
That and the cost, because it's also the most expensive.
right. So, you know, I just want to say, like, I actually think this issue is contributing to a lot of shortages.
I think that you're absolutely right. And if someone is able to make it through the interview process and is functional and together enough that they're offered a job, if they're what they're doing at their home on their own time is not getting in the way of them being able to do all of that, and it's not relevant and going to impact the job they're doing, I think that there's no real need in knowing.
Criminal history, though, is not just doing what you're doing privately at home. That may be a very public.
It may be, and we're looking at, we've actually seen, in judiciary, as we've talked about sealing records and eliminating access to records, what we have seen in many instances is that once someone's criminal history is not available, their economic
Definitely.
realities become much better, and that has actually positively correlated to them being less likely to recidivate.
Well, we're just going to channel TJ on that. Best public safety policy is a good income.
And it's not a blanket prohibition. If the case can be made that it is relevant to that job, like I said, if you're applying to be a banker, having an understanding of what type of criminal history background you have and what your credit looks like makes perfect sense. But if you're bagging my groceries at Target, maybe it doesn't matter so much. And so tailoring in what that looks like is important. And Senator Runhinsdale, to your point, yes, I think it is causing shortages of perfectly capable employees in many places. We wouldn't be able to solve the CDL issue because that's federally regulated. And the bill does very clearly say that if it is required by federal law, of course, we're not going to try to supersede that in Vermont law.
So thank you for this. And unless there are other questions on this one, let's move to 128.
Yes, so 128 is a concept that we've had before us before. This is a one fair wage bill. This would eliminate the sub-minimum wage in all aspects of work. There's many places where we have sub-minimum wages in agriculture, in tipped work, in our carceral system. And so this simply eliminates that sub-minimum wage and sets the wage at $25 an hour, which is, I chose that because the MIT livable wage study puts the Chittenden County livable wage at $26.50. So it was sort of a little under Chittenden County and around the Vermont livable wage.
What you're introducing is to make my bill as 67 look really good, which is setting it at the livable wage calculated by the basic needs budget.
Yes, well, I used the MIT livable wage.
And we use the
calculation.
MIT, yeah. Great, and this does, this eliminates the sub-minimum wage in all areas. And also with tipped and ag workers specifically, right?
Yes,
And
and that
overtime.
does mean that those folks become eligible for overtime.
Exactly.
As I think if you're working overtime, you should get paid overtime pay.
Couldn't agree more fully. Thank you. Any questions on this?
Good point. For the $25 an hour minimum wage, has the Joint Fiscal Office done any type of analysis on that?
I have not asked them to do any impact, and I don't know how they would do.
They do. When we raised the minimum wage last time, huge amount of analysis that JFO works on us with. Joy Manchester.
120, not yet.
Yeah, we haven't done that yet. They won't do that until it's actively in play in a committee. And then they will do it. You heard Patrick say that they don't do that perspective. Yeah. So thank you. Any other questions? Great. Then Sophie will invite you to come and walk through these briefly. And Chris, are you? Oh, thank you. Are you waiting for me? Thanks.
I know you all have the bills in front of you, so do you want me to put them up on the screen, or you're happy to just go through them on your?
I think we're happy to go. Committee, how do you feel? I'm happy to go through them just with what we have. David,
Well, it's not really about us. We have our
Yeah.
it's about,
they're available on the website, but if we put them up now in real time, those who are watching can join us. Absolutely correct. So why don't we do that? I think we're trying to stay on top of all the bills that are coming in. We have just one or two more that we need to address. We'll do next week. And Sophie, have both of these bills been introduced also in the House? I haven't asked my Mark Mahaly if they have.
No, S90, no. S128, there are a variety of bills, particularly around agricultural workers, getting minimum wage, and overtime. So that aspect, I mean, all of them have slightly different wrinkles to them, so there's nothing exactly the same as 128. Yeah, I think this is the only bill with incarcerated folks getting the minimum wage. But this bill S90 is not in the House. This is the only version.
So let's look at S90.
Right. So Senator Hofsky did a good job on covering what it does. So it's essentially in three parts. So one is on credit history, one is on criminal history, and one is on the drug testing. So what this does is so again, this is just making it clear that there's a general prohibition from employers failing to hire or refusing to hire or recruit or discharging or discriminating against individuals already hired because of someone's credit report or credit history. And there are a number of exemptions from that. So the prohibition is in subsection B. Subsection C, which is what's up right now, lists a number of exemptions. And it says, you know, if you meet one of the following conditions. And so under subsection C, for financial institutions or credit unions, the employer has to demonstrate that the information has a direct relationship to the job duties of the specific position of employment. So again, credit history, credit report likely will be very relevant in those situations, but if you're the janitor or something, probably not, right? So this is just adding a requirement that it be the right relationship. And then under F, the employer can demonstrate the information is a valid and reliable predictor of employee performance. Again, and it has a direct relationship to the job duties of the specific position of employment. And the same under G, which is if you're hiring somebody who has access to an employer's payroll information, the employer, if they can demonstrate the information has a direct relationship to the job duties. So again, that was essentially what Senator Bohofsky was saying, was really just making sure that if you're obtaining a credit report or credit history, there's a linkage between, you know, your need for that information to the job that the person would be doing.
if I could.
Yeah.
Who then adjudicates whether the rationale is appropriate or inappropriate?
Well, essentially, the employer would make that determination, and if the employee thinks that it was inappropriate or it wasn't correct, and that's why they weren't hired or they were fired because of it or whatever, then it would be a civil action. I mean, they would pursue it. They would have a legal recourse if that was the case.
Okay.
But the employer would be the one making the initial determination.
And maybe the employer through the HR department if they have one. And if they don't, just the employer.
Right. I'm looking at the point of contention that Sophie has.
And then subsection E is it's essentially deleting redundant language. So right now, this is all under the Fair Employment Practices Act in Title 21. And generally any violations in Title 21, so this kind of goes to your question, like what do you do? This is just referring people back to subdivision 4995A8, which is the protection against retaliation. So rather than having it all spelled out, it's just, this is more of a technical correction, just we're referring you to the language that covers that. And then section 2 gets into criminal history. It changes the title from criminal history records to criminal history, because criminal history records has a very specific definition that does include arrest, a whole list of things that are covered by a criminal history record. And again, the focus of the proposed bill is to really limit it to when somebody's actually been convicted of a crime, or if they have recently been charged with something, but that hasn't yet been adjudicated. So the fact that somebody was arrested for something, 10 years ago, was never charged or was found not guilty or something, that wouldn't apply. So again, here, just as Senator Bohofsky said, currently, as she said, there's been the ban the box, so you can't ask on an employment application if somebody has a criminal history. But under current law, you can inquire about that during the initial job interview. So this would remove that option. So right now, you wouldn't be able to ask applicants about their criminal history, either on the application form or during their job interview. If you get to a point where you've offered somebody a conditional offer of employment, sort of contingent on passing a background check, that's when it happens. So you're not excluding people. If you've got a funnel and you've got all your applicants in it, you're trying to keep people in as long as possible before you would get to that inquiry. So here, once you've made a conditional offer of employment, and again, the inquiry has a direct relationship to the job duties for that specific position, then you can request it.
David.
Just for clarity, so if I sent out a job rec and I got 100 applicants and I weeded it down to 15, I deep dove those. I chose 4 or 5 to interview. I couldn't ask this question until I got it down to the one person that I want to offer the job, and then I can ask them the question. If the question came back something that's not undesirable for the particular job I'm offering, I go back into the cycle. Is that?
Or if you had 4 people, you would then go to your number 2.
But I go back in,
Right.
okay, and then I start, and then hopefully I don't have
You don't have a whole crew of, right?
just.
So, I'm just asking for Randy, because you could inadvertently ask a question as you look at a resume and say, gosh, what happened in this 10 years? What was up? And you might ask it in ignorance, because it might not say 10 years in criminal detention or whatever. But you might say, well, I'm just curious what happened. What were you doing in those 10 years? So I assume one would be fine to ask.
But not obligated, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Not obligated. Sorry, Randy.
This question, this is largely about asking about convictions, crimes. Can you ask a person under the way this is worded, what's the biggest thing you stole from the place that you worked in the past?
Could you ask them that?
Oh, gosh,
Not
can't
many
even imagine.
convictions.
I think that would be problematic.
Would this prohibit asking that? Have you ever stolen anything from places?
I mean, I guess it sounds more like one of those, when did you stop beating your wife kind of question.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's like
You
kind of
may,
awkward.
right,
I
that you
can't even imagine asking that question in an
Oh,
interview.
I've asked it many times.
Sometimes pretty personal things, like office pressure and things like that.
I've certainly asked it many times, thousands of times, literally, in pre-employment interviews. And you'd be surprised what people tell you that they did.
Right.
They only get answers to questions that you ask. Would this be prohibited the way this is worded?
The way it's worded is that you would be asking specifically about their criminal history, and then if there are any unadjudicated sort of recent charges against them, and that you would only be asking that after, they've been offered a conditional job offer.
Yeah.
I think I'm not trying to steer you in a particular direction, but I think at some point you open yourself up to being sued for
Right.
If you ask one person that question and not another person that question, and that's
you want to be even, I would think, in terms of what you ask.
sure. So I suppose if you ask everybody what is the biggest thing you've ever stolen, but if people feel very jarred by that experience and they start asking other people, did you get asked that question? You might have a lawsuit on your hands. Just saying.
Anyway. Okay, let's keep going.
Yes, so if the information has a direct relationship on the job duties, again, then the employer can withdraw the conditional offer of employment. And again, one of the questions is always, well, what does a direct relationship mean? And so in considering that, these are the factors: the job duties of the specific position, the nature and gravity of the offence, the passage of time since the offence occurred or the prospective employee completed a prison sentence, the age of the prospective employee at the time the offence occurred, and the legitimate interest of the employer in protecting the property and safety and welfare of specific individuals or the general public. So those are kind of the factors. And again, if you're, obviously it's going to be different if you're being hired as the chief financial officer versus if you're working in a warehouse. I mean, or you had some juvenile interaction with the law is going to be different. If you're 40 years old and you've had a blameless life since then. So again, it's more just trying to focus in on is that criminal history going to be relevant to this particular job and your ability to do it. So again, there are the exceptions. So the general rule is this is when you can ask and what you can ask and why you can ask. And then onto subsection B gets into what the exceptions would be. So again, you can inquire about criminal convictions on an initial employee application form in certain circumstances. And again, federal or state law. So again, Senator Bohosky mentioned it could be dealing with federal law, like the commercial driver's license. This has not changed. If an employer inquires about a prospective employee, so that, again, this is just a technical correction to remove the language around criminal history record, because that has a very specific meaning. And generally speaking, if you do find out that somebody has a criminal history, the main goal is to ask somebody about it. What did happen? What were the circumstances? To sort of find out about that, give them an opportunity to explain. This would increase the civil penalty from $100 under the current law to $1,000 for a violation. And again, it removes that definition of criminal history record.
Just curiosity. I'm wondering if there's a shoes on the other foot as well, that if a employer needs to know this information based on the criteria that you just went through, that if there's a fine for the employee who lies about their history, is
there is not
You're channeling Rand.
not in this statute.
not?
No. That's a good Randy question.
Right. No, in this statute, there's not.
Okay.
So I'm just curious, what was this fine set? Do you know? Because this is 10 times the.
I'm not sure, but I will say I was looking at a different statute the other day, an employment statute, and the administrative penalty was $100, and that had been set in 1957, and it had never been changed since 1957.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's what it is here, but there are a lot of administrative penalties that when you look at them, they're surprisingly small, and they just have never been changed. And I would say a lot of employers have policies that if they find out that you've made a material misrepresentation, that's grounds to terminate somebody. So if they were to find out that in fact you had been convicted of armed robbery, 5 years ago, and you lied about that, that would be grounds typically for termination.
Yeah, termination is one thing.
Right.
Penalty is another. Here we have penalties.
Right. And then the final section is to do with the drug testing. And again, an employer can ask an applicant or require an applicant to submit to a drug test only if the following conditions are met. And this is current law. And what this is doing to the current law is just adding in essentially for cannabis use for symptom relief. So it's really just expanding it to take into account the current changes that have occurred in Vermont's law around that. So,
Right.
And again, it's got a relationship to job duty. So again, information relating to the applicant's possible use of drugs has a direct relationship to the ability to perform the job. So again, if somebody's in charge of a nuclear facility, maybe that's going to feel different than somebody that's moving boxes.
Yep. And that last page.
It's got, yes, relationship to job duties.
Right,
Again,
same.
very effective date.
So that's just. Any questions on this one, or let's move to 128? And Chris, I'm gonna have you weigh in after Sophie, if you have anything you want to add.
I just wanna, so I'm presenting S-133 tomorrow in natural resources. And I
Great.
didn't know if you all wanted a preview.
I think we're gonna have some time after this, so
Great.
that would be great. So,
I just made a slide deck.
so good. Oh, how exciting. I've
Okay.
been
I'll share
watching
with
you being very productive here. Okay, Sophie, let's look at 128 and then we'll turn to Keisha's. Unless, Chris, you have anything, if we take these up, I assume you'll have some.
If you take them up, I'd love to.
I hear you. Okay, so Sophie, let's look at 128.
So again, this is really focused on wage and hour, and dealing with minimum wage and overtime. Again, just as Senator Bohofsky went through, so I forget to cover up really swiftly here. So the important thing to understand with the way the wage and hour law is set up is that section 383 lists who's an employee and then who's excluded from being an employee. So this, in the definition section, if you are excluded as an employee, that means that you're not eligible for the state minimum wage or for overtime. So there's no specific language in 383 around overtime, but it's important to understand that when you delete these exclusions, that means people then become eligible for the state minimum wage and for overtime at 40 hours a week. So this would say that only individuals working in agriculture who work for their parent, spouse, or child, so it's family members of an agricultural employer. Otherwise, other agricultural employees would be eligible for minimum wage and for overtime. And then it deletes the exclusion of domestic service, all the other ones other than these two. So one is individuals employed by the United States, and the other is individuals employed in a bona fide executive, administrative, or professional capacity. So typically, those are the folks, that are more highly paid under federal law. There's a test around, who meets that definition. And generally, right now, there was an effort under the Biden administration to shift that definition, but this would retain that definition that we currently have, but it removes these other ones. And you're going to ask me why some of these exist. Again, these have all been in place since 1957. The only one that's come out, as far as I could tell, was one around telephone operators with 150 stations or something. So otherwise, these are all ones that have been in there since 1957.
And it's interesting when we redid the minimum wage bill in 17 that we didn't eliminate some of these, but I don't think we looked at as much of the sub-minimum wage pieces.
Well, also the minimum wage is in 384, and this is 383, the definition. So that may be why.
So is there not also one in terms of age? I'm not seeing one. I thought that there was also a sub-minimum wage opportunity for kids under a certain age.
Yeah. Oh, so it's the students there. Working during all or any part of the school.
Yes. Right. It was, yeah. Right. Okay. Great.
And then 384, this is where the minimum wage is set. So this would increase the minimum wage to $25 an hour starting January 1 of 2026. And then with that current language around the percentage increase that's in current law.
If I can, sorry to,
yes,
I'm going back to the example list, if I can, on page 2.
Yeah.
What I've noticed, so taxi cab drivers got my attention, and I figured, well, maybe that's originally because they got tips or something like that.
Well, they were employed by a company.
What I noticed was that none of the folks who part of their salary is based on tips versus wage, such as waitress, waiter.
That's in the next section, just down the floor.
Number 12.
Right. There was actually, I found, which I'm happy to share with the committee, but I think it was the House Committee on General and Housing had requested a few years ago as a research project from the students at Dartmouth on the history of the minimum wage. And it may have been when there were changes you were referencing in 2017. But it was kind of interesting around the history and as to why some of these exemptions are in there. And I'm happy to share that by way of background if folks would be interested.
Yeah.
So again, would increase to $26 an hour starting $25 an hour starting in 26. January 1 of 26, and then with the current increases that we have. And then this subsection 2 is the hotel, restaurants, the tipped workers. And this would essentially eliminate the tipped worker exemption from the minimum wage to say that as of January 1, 2026, service and tipped employees would receive minimum wage.
Yes, and from that work in House General and in Senate Economic Development, we had very mixed testimony on this. Because the higher end restaurants, of course, they make a lot of money on tips, and then the lower end restaurants. And this is,
But just to level set, there, you are required to ensure that the person's wage
is
at the minimum wage with their tip.
for
So,
restaurant workers, not for hotels. Like, is that also true for hotels? But maybe.
yeah, you can't,
I think it is,
you
yeah,
can't
you
have
can't,
someone
like-
making the actual minimum.
That's right. So if they don't make the up to minimum wage in tips, then the
Yes.
employer does have to compensate. So that is
So
absolutely,
that's what they are receiving minimum wage in the moment. Yeah.
so they never are receiving minimum wage.
And again, there's no specific language here about overtime. But again, overtime would then apply to those folks. And again, I know Senator Brock and Senator Ron Hinsdale know we had those conversations in the
Mhm.
Agricultural Workers Study Committee.
David, you have.
Yeah, I just another question on the exempt list.
Okay.
Again, I apologize, but it's just for clarity, page 2, line 5, an individual striking out an individual employed in domestic service, et cetera. So I trying to figure out where that came from, but I think it's about having domestic service on station all the time. They live in your house, such as a nanny or domestic help. And because they essentially live in the house, they're essentially on call all the time. Is this requiring them to then be paid minimum wage for every hour that they're on station?
That they're on duty. And there are, under the Fair Labor Standards Act at the federal level, there is language around how you calculate that for living.
But it doesn't
Oh,
actually
it's right.
mention living here.
It doesn't mention living, but I would think you would probably look at the federal rules around how you would calculate, like when somebody's on duty, how that would work out. And the other piece is that, again, you can also charge room and board. We have under Vermont law, there's a schedule that's set, and it's pretty modest, but you can deduct from wages for room and board.
Okay, thank you.
But as Keisha, as we all will remember who were here for the minimum wage discussion, the tipped piece isn't just about they're receiving minimum wage, which they're all guaranteed to receive. It's about the abuse they have to endure to get a good tip and what they put up with, which is often appalling. Speak to long that's worried about that. Oh, you weren't on the committee at that point. Well, anyway. Yeah, anyway.
I mean,
Just a question
Yeah.
regarding vendor inmate compensation, appropriate for they to charge room and board.
So, I mean,
Would that be prohibited?
this wouldn't prohibit that, and it also wouldn't
But
interfere with.
Would it or could it, or could it not be considered part of the wage compensation, the same as being a living servant life as far as the room and board?
So right now, under the statute, there is language around when somebody does and again, the wages are incredibly low. But when someone does there are rules around the money goes like into a fund and then what you can use.
So I know they
that.
mentioned it, it's mentioned in some cases in this bill is what someone could go to, but the issue of the room and board is not mentioned, at least here.
So we're jumping to section 3. That's
Right.
where we are.
I would just say a couple things about this discussion. Number one, I think if we were to look at something like this, it's really good to look at new technologies like the website care.com. It actually is really highly used by a lot of families because it helps make sure you're doing payroll properly.
Right.
You're essentially paying for a payroll service that people didn't have access to before. So you're not caught for trying to do the right thing, but not doing it well because this stuff is confusing.
That's helpful.
Two, on this whole piece about tips and service, I mean, I think retail workers would like to have a word. about that. Anyone in a service position usually feels some level of abuse and for treatment. And, you know, we've heard about like Walmart workers being shot. I mean, that's a different issue, I think, than people providing good service for a tip. That has a really significant history of how we got to this place we are. But in our culture now, people who do service work are just treated badly. And I think at least some of them like to have tips for that.
Okay, let's finish this up because I want to get to Keisha's update if we
All
can.
right, I just wanted to, sorry.
That's okay. Just quickly on section 3, which is the offender. You're there. It's
Oh, am I? Okay. So I just, in response to Senator Brock, there is a separate statutory section. So it's 28 VSA 755 on disposition of earnings. So there's a list of
Yes.
what can be taken out. So again, this just provides that an offender will be compensated at the minimum wage. And certainly there's been, and if there's a technical correction, it's just to get rid of the he, she language. And then the final section is just saying that the Commissioner of Corrections would update, their policies to reflect that. And I'm pretty sure there was testimony, I can't remember in this committee if we talked about it before, but on average prison wages. There are 8 states that don't provide any, and it's between like 42 cents and $1.
And I didn't see anything there. I haven't seen anything when I scanned this about compensation for, if the person's getting a minimum wage in prison, are they paying for the room and board?
Right.
The answer is silent.
in other
But
ways.
there are, I think in other states, there are provisions where, earnings can go towards the cost of housing inmates. We don't have that right now, but certainly there's a statute that says what's going to happen with that money that could be amended.
David.
So the other day I figured out that as a legislator, we make about, I figured $6 an hour. I'm wondering if section 2 applies to me.
That much.
So I wish you'd been around for last year's discussion of our increasing our legislative pay.
Well,
Well, the year before, actually, it was.
I heard the drama on the chamber floor and I agree that it needs to be looked at. I just didn't figure that the solution was the appropriate solution. Thank you.
I just want healthcare.
Yeah, I want retirement. I want a number of things. Any other questions for Sophie? Sophie,
That's fine. Yes.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate. So before we, we will, we have a number of bills.
Might hear an echo for a second. Yeah, soon.
Okay. Do you have the link from? Right, great. Chris, thank you. Sophie, thank you very much. And we have, as you know, we have a couple of bills around this that we will probably pick up next session in some capacity. We'll see how that works. But I don't think we have time to dig into this at this point in the session. Okay. Keisha, you have.
And I want to disconnect my audio here, right? That's what.
Do you want to mute?
My comments.
You've got the technical advisor next to you. Technical advisor. That was working.
And 4 or 5 or 10
There you go.
That's it?
It's like,
Okay. So now I
Turn your mic on, so keep my Anderson for off. Yep.
You're all okay. See,
We're doing this and stuff.
okay, SNRE tomorrow. This is a dress rehearsal.
Yes, it is. Can I? Yes, you should.
So,
Okay, share.
so
My.
thank you, Sophie.
Just do the entire screen. Yes, they don't want YouTube to see.
Let's see.
Like if you're Googling Randy Brock. Let's do it.
So just to tee this up while she is pulling it all up.
Is that why I might want you to do it, Heidi?
It's fine. I have never done it either, but I've got it here on my screen.
Okay,
So
so
I will try it.
my computer like extremely old. I got a new one, but I haven't.
So just give it a try.
Thomas isn't able to do it for you.
I'm gonna do it again. You have to change permissions. If you're gonna do this in SNRE, you're gonna want to work through that.
I'm gonna ask you to do it in natural resources.
There's a good idea.
Okay.
Do you want to make it full screen?
Well, I'm gonna try.
Okay, now we're on to Heidi.
Yeah.
I think, oh no, this is probably not what I want.
So I think this is good for the new members of the committee to see because this is some of the data we dug into last year, but I'll go extremely quickly. This is our housing inventory in Vermont. Next slide. This is the cost of housing in Vermont, and I just saw that housing prices have fallen 5% this year, which is really good for some people and really bad for others if we're going into a forced recession. But next slide. This is what happened with homelessness during the height of the pandemic, is that people were looking for housing for much longer. And that has not changed. That when people say we cannot find a place to live, this is what they're talking about.
And where did you get the length of time that they?
That's AHS.
That's it.
Yeah. Coordinated entry.
Yeah, coordinated.
This is job openings in the state. So, we like to think we just have always had a lot of, help wanted signs out, but it is directly correlated to housing. Next slide. This is from Pew Charitable Trust. So this gets me into why I'm going to the Natural Resources Committee specifically. But multifamily housing is what keeps rent prices down and is what reduces homelessness. It's just clear across the country. The research consensus is absolutely ironclad. That we now have experiments in many municipalities around the country where when they liberalized their housing policies, they slowed or reversed rent growth and reduced homelessness.
Right.
Next slide. This is Burlington, Vermont. And this is to show, for especially the other committee, that why we were talking about this in natural resources and housing is because many environmental policies were weaponized against people of color, low-income people, and in Burlington, a lot of immigrants.
So what are we looking at?
Oh, what we're looking at is what would be considered a polite version of redlining in Burlington. So different colors. It's from, I think, the 40s. Maybe I'll leave this slide out because it's really fuzzy. I don't know. It used to look a lot better.
Just need to frame it more. I don't know when this
Yeah.
is from.
So this is from the time period before the Fair Housing Act, when you could essentially color in different places and say, there is a line around these places we will not lend to certain people in these areas. But I'll probably delete this slide because it's looking bad.
So what's
Yeah.
the relevance of 1940 Burlington redlining to today's housing?
We will get to that actually. So this is a slide of in Burlington, what was historically Little Italy. So the environmental movement and the land use planning movements have been complicit, if not active, in destroying affordable housing for lower income people, and particularly immigrants, during urban renewal. So Burlington's part in urban renewal was razing to the ground most of the immigrant communities and putting in a large mall instead. Can go to the next slide. When you look at our land use policies and when they came into being in Vermont, it was during time periods of great migration. So I won't go into it here, but our land use laws were actively tied to not creating more housing for certain populations who were migrating from the South. Up north, we were actively recruiting Swedish farmers to move to Vermont, so we did not have to give access to Black farmers farmland in the state.
If you're talking though about those percentages, how many people are we talking about in each category?
Well,
Because the number of Black African American in 1970 was quite small compared to today.
it actually wasn't.
Wasn't it?
No. And in fact, if you look at today, I had a slide, but it's not in here. There are only, and this was a few years ago, there were only 18 Black homeowners total in Burlington.
In
So-
1970?
No, in 2 years ago. So the numbers have, and in fact, there are far, far more Black renters than there were previously. But if you just look at 2020 and ignore 1970, that's just really stark. If any other community had a 26% homeownership rate, we would consider it a crisis. Next slide, please. This is my favorite slide to share with people. This is the average lot size in every state in the country. I wanted to make it bigger so you could see the states down there are like California and really big states, but ones that don't have, but ones that have multifamily housing that evens out the average lot size. Vermont hovers like an alien above the rest of the country, including New Hampshire, Maine, Alaska, Montana.
Yeah, we are the largest, we have the largest size.
And that is not by accident.
Do you connect that with Act 250 and the 10-acre?
Yes, absolutely.
But in all fairness, it precedes Act 250.
Well, it precedes Act 250, but this is happening right now in Jericho. Like I've been asked to get involved in. There's a group that wants to create Wisdom House, which
Yes,
they
we
our
had
committee
that
before.
presented last year.
There's a proposal on the table to parcelize that lot so it cannot be turned into multifamily housing. This continues. This is exactly what Pew Charitable Trust was talking about. If you say, oh, you can have a manufactured house, but you have to put it on a 2-acre lot, you lose the ability to house low income people and it give them a chance at homeownership. Next slide. Just so you guys know, we looked at this a lot last year. It was just the travel patterns in the state for work. And it might not be obvious, but there are like deep neon hotspots that people are traveling from all over the state to go to. And that's not great. Exactly. And that's not great for our climate policy.
Well, and not go to. So you look at this huge place no one's going to.
Right. Well, I think that's a lot of forest. But next slide. This is the most important slide on the environmental and climate front. Vermont, you heard from Pew Charitable Trust, has the highest number of households with 2 or fewer people. Now, if we had lots of little 1-bedroom apartments, this wouldn't seem like a big deal, but we don't. We have many, many single family homes that have 2 or fewer people, where they are also generally folks who would like to get out of that housing and into something they can maintain and afford, and they're not able to do that. Next slide, please. This is a problem for our committee, and this should also be considered a problem for a committee that wants to have people live in efficient housing. So between transportation and home heating, those are our biggest emitters of carbon and fossil fuels. And we probably have the oldest housing stock in the country.
We
at this
do
point.
have
Yeah, I
the
believe it's-
oldest housing stock in the country, so 1940 is great, but it would be very interesting to know what our housing stock is before 1850.
So what happens, I mean, what then happens is we have a lot of housing that's not up to code and not available to people. And we still then have historic preservation rules and efficiency rules that make it hard to be habitable again.
Well, and quite honestly, the housing before 1900, very expensive to do the right thing. We all want to do the right thing, but it makes a huge cost to weatherize and bring a house up to efficiency standards for today, which is really.
But we also make that harder. A lot of housing Burlington is not doing a good job of that.
On this whole, I'd say the state has tried hard to make that more affordable for many people.
Oh, sorry. Is that okay? Yeah, that's great. So we've talked about this in committee somewhat, but this is brought into stark relief for us during flooding events that, we end up having certain populations that are heavily impacted over others. Next slide. So just in case this slide hasn't come up in committee this year yet,
I think it's
did we have this slide? So this is the slide that we're basing our targets on for the additional opportunities for year-round housing.
Right. So this either came up with Kevin or Maura.
Mm-hmm. And so I think Maura said we are seeing like something in between pre-pandemic demand and pandemic demand. But it's fluctuating between the 30 and 40,000 unit range.
Per year? No.
total for the next 5 years. So 7,000 per year. Next slide. And just so you all know, we did a lot of mapping with our last two bills to demonstrate where our designated areas are, which I call human habitat when I'm in the Natural Resources Committee, because this is where we need to actually have very little land use regulation, because the land use is no longer in question. This is where we should be building. Next slide. Just for your edification, but this is squarely a natural resources policy. These are the environmental justice maps that we created in the last 2 years with natural resources. And this helps give you a sense of where what we would consider our environmental justice populations are concentrated. So higher population of people of color, higher, which for Vermont is over 1% population, limited English proficiency, and areas of the state where the household income is less than 80% of area median income. So that's just to give you a sense of, these are the communities where there's a lot of blight, aged housing stock.
What's the first one on the left again, please?
6% or more population people of color.
Okay. And the one in the middle?
Over 1% limited English proficiency.
Okay.
And then, so it's race, language, and income. This is our permit system. So that's why I often try to tell people that we started 3 years ago with the municipal level, furthest to the left. We went to Act 250 because it's squarely our jurisdiction. And now I'm trying to get at the state ANR and historic preservation column. So there's a real method to the madness here. There's a real science in looking at this flow chart that post Act 250's create. Act 250 once upon a time was the only thing we had. And so it might have made sense to say, look at all these important things we have to consider. It definitely made sense. Now that's duplicated or triplicated or more. And most of these processes, as you can see in the bottom, also have an appeals process. This may have changed. No one's updated this chart from our last two bills. Hopefully it shrank a few of
I was going to say, this needs an update.
Yes, but it would be great to see and to see if it's still
Yeah, so this was
how much progress we've made.
Okay, keep going.
Next slide. This is the last slide. This is what's in S133. These are, I usually try to take things that we have heard are issues, not just sort of like what we think would be exciting. So this is, you do not have to get a permit to build housing for your own family on your own land. You do not need to go through full municipal permit processing if you are redeveloping an industrial zone. That's what we heard from Orleans and the industrial park that they wanted to turn into manufactured housing access. We really do need to be clear about what we meant by along water and sewer. That is coming up in a lot of contexts. So I really hope if Natural Resources doesn't move the whole bill, we will look at this one, because this is being litigated in ways that I don't think we intended.
Right, and this is your corridor.
It's not just corridor, it's you're on a road with
your
water.
Route 7, your
It's Route
water
7.
up to the.
It's if you're in an area with municipal water and sewer.
Right.
You should be allowed to get density on your.
So have you
acreage.
created your density algorithm yet?
I actually found a new constituent on Monday at the Shelburne. He does national housing financial intelligence work. Anyway, I have people who are helping me, but this is saying we direct ACCD to develop a density algorithm. By Right Housing Toolkit, that's what exists in Maine. These are just examples from AARP, but essentially that's to help visualize. You might say, okay, these are types of housing blueprints that you can do by right. So we don't.
And these are with the exception of one, maybe all multifamily.
Yeah, exactly. Tier 1B opt-out, we had put it as an opt-out last year, and it came back at the end of session as an opt-in. I would like to say to finance, I personally think we could be looking at tying your any property tax advantage you might get to your but getting close to meeting your housing goals or, opting, being in a tier 1B. This one is one that I would love to keep working on. And know that it
This is your
is
magic
challenging, but yeah,
This
that
is your
appeal
math.
does not halt a project in the Act 250 process. We've heard a lot from our lumber folks, and they have long wanted an Act 250 exemption. It's really killing them to have their hours constrained, to continue to fall under other people's
This could,
sense of what is appropriate for a
This-
sawmill operation.
this could also be an ag piece for the agriculture.
Sure. And then you've heard me talk about development soils and wetland buffers. Constructed wetlands is when you could be in an industrial park and a building gets built and creates a wetland between two buildings. Senator Chittenden and I had this situation occur to our constituents in a true industrial park to South Burlington. So
Right, this is terrific.
And then to build, and then they can't build because somebody built an upland of them creating wetlands on their property.
So,
and they paid $600,000 for a piece of land that then became a wetland.
It's exactly what we want. So
that wasn't a wet one.
That was not a wetland when they bought it. Yeah.
So you're presenting this tomorrow morning.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Terrific. We wish you well.
Thank you.
We'll miss you in here,
Thank
but
you.
we will wish you well. I think
Could
we're
you
gonna go on break.
Copy
Sure.
what you
Yeah.
said?
Yeah, and maybe have.